When writing quirky characters, or specifically characters with a quirky name, we as writers often need to walk a tightrope between quirky on the one hand and silly on the other. You don't want your characters drifting off too much into the absurd, unless of course that is what you are going for and you want to write a silly character, but even in a comedy story filled with silliness, you still want your character to at least be relatable. As Kirk Lazarus already said, everybody knows you never go full retard. So, let's get right to it and try to answer the question, how do you walk that tightrope? One of the most important things you need to look out for when writing a quirky character is backstory. Take, for example, The Grinch, written by Dr. Seuss. If I told you I was planning on writing a story about a large, green, fuzzy creature who lives in a snowflake and spends his days eating garbage and plotting on how to harass an entire town close by, this would quite frankly sound a bit daft, wouldn't it? But, given the backstory of how he was shunned by society in that town, merely for looking different and being stronger and taller than the other children his age, and how he suffered from this, having his heart shattered and thus not being able to embrace the Christmas spirit in the same way the other townsfolk has, gives this quirky odd being a backstory that makes him and his actions somewhat relatable to us, the audience. We can understand his actions to a certain extent. He steals all of the presents because he himself never received one. He mistrusts everyone he encounters, apart from his dog, because he knows that visiting him at his mountain lair is seen as a kind of dare amongst the town's teenagers. The shield he has set up around his heart, or the non-existence of it entirely, has been made believable to us in a way that it also is believable to an audience of children. Another example we can look at is Willy Wonka by Roald Dahl. Oh, by the way, I am, of course, aware of the several controversies surrounding Roald Dahl. However, I purposely did not choose to dive into them too deep. Yes, Roald Dahl was anti-Semitic and racist, and yes, the origin story of the Oompa Loompas is really messed up. Look it up. However, I want these videos to solely be about writing styles and what we can learn from them, and not about political views, racism, or anti-Semitism. Oh, and I know I will need some of the story from the musical movie released in 2023, although that actually really hurts me, as in my opinion that movie is merely an example of another annoying IP cash grab. I really hate those, I really do. Maybe I will make a video on that topic in the future at some point, as it does really grind my gears. It basically sets up another barrier to entry for new and upcoming IPs by interesting authors that might have a new story to tell, and not yet another superhero movie or The Fast and the Furious 97 or whatever. Anyway, Willy Wonka's quirkiness. It expresses itself not only through his odd contraptions or the incredibly unsafe workspace he has created in his candy factory, or his flamboyantly eccentric clothing style, but also in his childlike demeanor that he displays in a mischievous and playful nature. Throughout the tour of the factory, Wonka observes the behavior of the children closely. He notes their reactions to various challenges and temptations that he has set up. His quirky mischievousness is evident as he tests the children's self-control and moral integrity, knowing that, for example, the everlasting gobstopper presents an almost irresistible temptation to those who are greedy. In the end, it is the protagonist Charlie Bucket, the humble and kind-hearted kid, who passes Wonka's series of tests and thus becomes his successor. I always saw Willy Wonka's childlike quirkiness as an overreaction to maybe a lost or stolen childhood. In the musical movie, we can see that he grew up without a mother, or with his mother having passed fairly early in his life. This kind of trauma offers a believable backstory to his later behavior. We can see what happens to people in real life when they weren't able to live out their childhood as a child. I mean, the best example of that I can think of is Michael Jackson. Although, again, with all of the controversies, that is a topic I also don't want to touch, actually. By the way, Wes Anderson even said that Roald Dahl had the capability of inventing stories that have details and ideas in them that stick in people's minds for decades and decades. Another character we can look at is Captain Jack Sparrow from the Pirate series. A quirky character with an odd walking style, but why do we look at Jack Sparrow and become immersed in the story rather than thinking he is a part of, I don't know, Monty Python's Ministry of Silly Walks? Why is that the case? Backstory. Another reason why this movie, that was basically commissioned work by Disney to promote a theme park ride, actually became a really good movie. It's Gibbs, actually, that explains to Will Turner that when Barbossa led the mutiny against Jack on the Black Pearl and marooned him on the abandoned island with nothing but a pistol and one shot left in it, it was the heat that drove Jack into madness, and that basically is the reason for his quirky behavior. And, coincidentally, that is good writing. But what about writing characters that maybe you do not have the time to create an elaborate backstory for? Can they still be quirky? And can you give them a quirky name? Well, to be honest, as so many things, that depends. Are you writing a comedy, and can backstory be implied in some case? For a perfect example, look no further than Justin Roiland and Dan Harmon. By the way, there's a series on Dan Harmon playing D&D with a couple of other people. You should really check that out. It is absolutely hilarious, and it also shows how Dan Harmon thinks about things from a writer's perspective. In one encounter, for example, the character that he is playing ditches the other ones in the party and just runs away for character development purposes. It's actually really brilliant. So anyway, Dan Harmon and Justin Roiland. They are obviously known for writing Rick and Morty together, a show with a plethora of quirky characters. But the one I want to take a closer look at, especially when it comes to implied backstory, is the character of Mr. Meeseeks from the first season. A weird-looking blue chap with thin limbs whose sole purpose is to fulfill an order given to him, no matter the order. And due to the invulnerability of Meeseeks, he cannot be killed until he has fulfilled this order. And that is where the implied backstory comes into play. As Mr. Meeseeks tells Jerry Smith, and thus us the audience, we Meeseeks are not born into this world fumbling for meaning. We are created to serve a singular purpose for which we will go to any lengths to fulfill. Existence is pain to a Meeseeks, and we will do anything to alleviate that pain. This simple sentence implies backstory. We as an audience immediately understand that existence is pain for any Meeseeks, and only death can relieve them of this existence. Death that they can only achieve by fulfilling their order. And until they can reach this salvation, their state deteriorates dramatically, both mentally and physically. That is enough for us as an audience to relate and to not question their quirkiness. It doesn't seem silly to us. So, what can you take away from this video? What have we learned? Writing quirky characters, and giving them the occasional odd name, is perfectly fine as long as you can justify the quirkiness. And that is most easily done by creating the fitting backstory. This doesn't have to be a traumatic one. However, trauma makes for a good origin when it comes to quirkiness. That was it for this video here on Conjure Story. If you liked this video, feel free to like and subscribe and stick around for more. And if you have any suggestions or feedback, feel free to write it in the comments section.